Hello, BookTube, and welcome to our first read-along of 2019, Phineas Finn, by Anthony Trollope, the second in the series of novels that has been called the Palliser novels, the parliamentary novels, starring a young son of an Irish doctor named Phineas Finn, who decides to enter English politics, gets the bug to enter English politics and to rise up the rung of the ladder as high as he can go. This novel comes after Can You Forgive Her, which we read last year. And that was the first in the parliamentary series, even though the parliamentary aspect was decidedly secondary in that novel. I think those of you who were reading the first 26 chapters for today, and those of you who have done the reading will know right away that that is not true for this book. This book earns the term parliamentary novel, for good or ill. It was written, at Trollope's usual white-hot speed. When the cogs and wheels of a novel's plot came into place for him, then he couldn't sit still. He just covered sheets of pages every day until the novel was written. So he started this in November of 1866 and was done with it in May of 1867. And serialized it after that, as was the way with Victorian fiction. It was serialized from 1867 to 1869 before it even became a book. And while it was still being serialized, while chapters of this novel about a young man from the provinces trying to rise to make his way into English politics, Anthony Trollope was also trying to make his way into English politics disastrously. He stood as a Liberal candidate for Beverley and was, let's just say, soundly rejected by the electorate. He came in dead last. And it dashed what I think were probably fairly deep-seated hopes of his to take part in what he describes in this book and other books as the pinnacle of English life for an English man, to be a member of Parliament. I don't know that undercolors a lot of what we're seeing here. This is an extremely, as those of you who've read along the chapters that we've read so far, this is not starry-eyed at all. It has starry-eyed moments, but this is an extremely cynical book about politics. And the chattering and the backbiting and the deal-making that goes into politics on all levels. The nice thing about having Phineas Finn come in at a young age, knowing nothing of the system, is that it works as a perfect device to show us English politics on all levels, which might not have been true. Trollope, at the end of his life, tended to regret that he had made Phineas Finn an Irishman. He was in Ireland when he was dreaming up this plot, and that it just fell into place. And when a cog or a wheel, when an element of a plot fell into place for him, he very seldom troubled to remove it. So he just kept it that way. And I don't know. I can kind of see the point. That fails, makes sure that the novel will fail to be completely representative. But even so, I think it works better if our main character is an outsider. Unfortunately, the strengths of Phineas Finn as an outsider, as a character, are, in my opinion, counterbalanced enormously by the fact that he is the weakest character in the book. And I wonder, as usual with these read-alongs, I'll wonder if you have the same impression. Phineas Finn is pleasant. We're told over and over again in this book that not only is he pleasant, but he likes to be pleasant. He likes to make other people be pleasant. And he tends to bring that out in people. And oh my, does he bring it out in the ladies. Because we're told over and over again, it's not stressed to a lugubrious extent, but still, we're told over and over again that Phineas Finn is astonishingly handsome and extremely easygoing, very good with the ladies, a natural person to sit in a drawing room and just talk with ladies. And he does more than just talk. He is, in addition to being personally and politically vacuous, he's also a bit of a flirt. In fact, more than a bit of a flirt. He's entertaining romantic ideas about virtually every unattached woman and a couple of attached women anywhere in this book. And we meet, it wouldn't be so big a deal, I think, if this were, it would be pretty obvious to readers from fairly early on in this book that it is a book about politics. And so maybe you can get away with having a cipher as the main focus. But the problem is that Trollope can't do that. He's actually very good at characters, and he cannot content himself with having a sort of Bunyan-esque everyman as the sole main focus of his book. Instead, he fills the book with other characters. there's Violet Effingham, there's Lady Laura Standish and her brother, Lord Chiltern, their father, the Earl of Brentwood. There's a lawyer, a well-meaning lawyer and his wife. There's a hilarious and extremely well-drawn politically inclined landlord, Mr. Bunce, and his wife. And we get the whole spectrum of British society. Of British political society, of the uppermost rungs of that society. And the reason that we're able to get that whole spectrum is because everybody in the book falls under Phineas Finn's spell. Not that he's a sorcerer. He isn't trying to do anything of the kind. It's totally unconscious on his part, but everybody likes him. Everybody wants to like him, and they want to include him. And soon he finds himself invited to just the right country houses and to just the right events. He does get into Parliament, even though he has no money. He's living on a fairly modest allowance made to him by his father, and turning down the urgings of the head of his law concern that wants him to go into law, wants him to have an honest profession. Instead, he wants to be in politics. He wants a place at the table. And keep in mind that all of these political events take place at a time when politics in this particular time was very much a pastime for the rich. It wasn't paid, so you were serving until you got some sort of cabinet position. It wasn't paid, so it was for idlers, scroungers, trimmers, chance takers, and we meet a whole bunch of those. the Mr. Bonteens and the Rattlers and the whatnots that show up in this book on the periphery. They show up in every book in this series on the periphery, constantly jockeying, constantly finding themselves in with one ministry or out with another. But we meet the bigger people too, the doers and shakers. And it's not just Phineas Finn who's interested in that world and in who's up and who's down, of whose reputation can be made and whose reputation can be destroyed, of what legislation is currently being floated and what has a good chance and what isn't. It's not just Phineas Finn, and it's also not just those politicians. It's also the women in the book. Violet Effingham, Lady Laura, and later on, Madame Max. And also, on the periphery so far, in the chapters that we've read, Lady Glencora Palliser. Lady Glen is I would argue, a signature character in these books, but not in the part of this book that we're reading. That's the weird thing about the Palliser novels, and one of the reasons why people in Trollope's own day and ever since have had such a hard time labeling this series. The books clearly organically belong together, at least in a world, if not in an overall plot scheme, but not explicitly, and certainly not sequentially. So you don't really know. Characters come and go. They go into the fine focus in the foreground for a while, and then they fade away. But anyway, Phineas Finn makes a splash in London with all of these political ladies who cannot enter politics themselves, but are nevertheless deeply interested in it and like to take up pet politicians. And there's no one they like to pet more than Phineas Finn. And Finn, because he is now a member of Parliament, gets involved in what it's like to be a member of your party. What if your party asks you, as they do, what if they demand that you take a stand in Parliament that's the exact opposite of the stand that you ran on to get into Parliament? What will you do? What choice do you have? Where are the deals being made? Where are the conversations happening? At what country houses? That sort of thing. We watch Phineas get involved in all of that. And we watch, because Trollope is a master of this sort of thing, we watch how everybody thinks about everybody else in these early chapters. The focus of these early chapters, if you could say that there is one, is on what a very junior member of Parliament probably has to go through. Phineas Finn is constantly short of money, and he's constantly surrounded by people who are not. He has a rather oily bill collector come to his rooms it's a wonderfully creepy scene. The bill collector is in no hurry to leave, knows he can't be put out, and says that he'll do anything for his gentlemen as long as they're punctual. it's it's revolting, and it's no less revolting to Phineas Finn than it is to us. And we also get to listen to the ladies while they talk about him. He's a favorite subject of the ladies, because there's all sorts of love affairs, both active and stillborn, going on that Phineas Finn now becomes a part of. Lord Chiltern, for instance, is a violent red man, very active-tempered, very, very forthright, frightening, even. And he's in love with Violet Effingham, Lady Laura Standish. Phineas Finn is almost certain that he loves her and that she loves him. But she decides, for purely pecuniary reasons, purely societal reasons, she decides to marry Mr. Kennedy, who is introduced in this book in a classic Trollope signature aria that describes him as just this soulless stick of a man he's immensely wealthy, has an immensely beautiful country estate that becomes the focus for a good deal of significant scenes. And we're told that he's not mean-spirited, but neither is he guided by any kind of enlightenment either. He gets solicitations from charitable organizations. They cross his desk. They ask for such an amount of money. He writes out a check. It's just a matter of course. He doesn't believe in the charities. It's just an ordinary thing for him. He's seems on the surface to be just a bland milquetoast character of the kind that Trollope writes so well. But we know, since Lady Laura is so high-spirited and so intelligent and so independent in her mind, we know perfectly well that if she consents to marry this man, he will end up being a tyrant. We see that if you read more of Trollope, as we will. We're going to read all of Trollope. But the classic example of that, a book that was being written around this same time, was He Knew He Was Right, which is one of the greatest portraits of an unhealthy marriage that I know of in the English language. But Lady Laura's with Mr. Kennedy is also unhealthy. It doesn't take her long before she realizes that being mistress of that enormous property and all that wealth and all that secure social standing doesn't amount to much if she hates the man, if she's coming to despise him, and if he's coming to warrant being despised. That becomes much more pronounced in this book and is the main focus of the sequel. But one of the other, like I said, the main focus of these chapters that we're reading today are the early struggles of a nobody in Parliament. Now, Phineas Finn has lots of advantages. He's very pleasant. He's very beautiful. He's very easy to get along with. And as a result of that charisma, he gets invited to the right places, to the right country houses, to the right meetings, and starts to rise in the world of politics. So that when we end our reading today, we are talking about a chapter called The First Speech, where he is called upon to get up and talk in Parliament. Your first speech is always a big deal. It's often reported on. Lord Byron's first speech was the talk of London for a week. And the first speeches are often nothing particularly interesting. And Trollope makes sure that we know that is the case here, that objectively speaking, Phineas Finn's first speech is a disaster. And I want to read you a bit of that, just to give you a feel for the scene that is the first speech. Phineas Finn had sundry gifts: a powerful and pleasant voice, which he had learned to modulate, a handsome presence, and a certain natural mixture of modesty and self-reliance, which would certainly protect him from the faults of arrogance and pomposity, and which, perhaps, might carry him through the perils of his new position. And he had also the great advantage of friends in the house who were anxious that he should do well. But he had not that gift of slow blood, which on former occasions would have enabled him to remember his prepared speech, and which now would have placed all his own resources within his own reach. He began with the expression of an opinion that every true reformer ought to accept Mr. Mildmay's bill, even if it were accepted only as an installment. But before he had got through these sentences, he became painfully conscious that he was repeating his own words. He was cheered almost from the outset, and yet he knew as he went on that he was failing. He had certain arguments at his fingers' ends, points with which he was, in truth, so familiar that he need hardly have troubled himself to arrange them for special use, and he forgot even these. He found that he was going on with one platitude after another, as to the benefit of reform in a manner that would have shamed him 6 or 7 years ago at a debating club. He pressed on, fearing that words would fail him altogether if he paused. But he did in truth speak very much too fast, knocking his words together so that no reporter could properly catch them. But he had nothing to say for the bill except what hundreds had said before and hundreds would say again. Still he was cheered, and still he went on. As he became more and more conscious of his failure, there grew upon him the idea, the dangerous hope, that he might still save himself from ignominy by the eloquence of his invective against the police. That last bit of inspiration doesn't turn out well. But you see, even in that segment, Trollope is describing that he is failing, that he's flailing around in his speech. He's wandered away from prepared points and any kind of order, and is just blathering. And yet he's being cheered. And obviously in that scene, he's not just being cheered by his friends. He's being cheered by all of his side, whether he's doing a good job or not. He's the type of character that people like to cheer, which makes the upcoming dramatics between him and Lord Chiltern in this book all the more dramatic, because Phineas Finn himself hates such things. We actually get a little glimpse into his mind, and it's a little earlier in the chapters that we're reading here, and it's a classic example of Trollope not only giving us a glimpse into the main character's mind, but also just easily wandering to one side and the other to give us aspects of that character as seen by other characters. This is we're in most of this passage. We're in Phineas Finn's head, but not when Trollope doesn't want us to be. He is in such complete command of what he's doing when the creative heat was on him, as it was for this book. Because keep in mind, while he was writing this, his own political ambitions, the things that are driving Phineas Finn, were at the strongest they would ever be in his life. He was going to Parliament, to the visitors' galleries, and soaking up the speeches and the mannerisms and the pacing and the nature of the crowd and all of that. He was there in the gallery, taking notes, absorbing it all. What a sight that must have been. This is an extremely personal novel for him. You can always tell with Trollope, I think, when his novels are more personal than others. And it shows up in odd places. There's no one novel that's entirely personal. But I don't think there are any great novels that are entirely impersonal. I will confess, I think what you've probably been able to sense already in this video, which is that I do not consider Phineas Finn to be a great Trollope novel. Phineas Finn, I think, is the weakest of the Palliser books, mainly because, for me anyway, the characters, the ladies and Lord Chiltern and his imperious but still just father, and all of the political stuff with all the political figures that we never get inside the head, we never get inside their heads, we never get inside their worlds, but they are all fascinating. All of that, for me, doesn't quite compensate for having a good-looking cipher carrying so much of the weight of this book. And we get a little of that in this passage. Let's see, where should we start? But could it be that such a woman as Lady Laura could accept such a man as Mr. Kennedy because of his wealth, and because of his fine place, a man who had not a word to throw to a dog, who did not seem to be possessed of an idea, who hardly looked like a gentleman? So Phineas told himself, but in truth Mr. Kennedy, though he was a plain, unattractive man, with nothing in his personal appearance to call for remark, was not unlike a gentleman in his demeanor. Phineas himself, it may be said here, was 6 feet high and very handsome, with bright blue eyes and brown wavy hair and a light silken beard. Mrs. Lowe had told her husband, that's the wife of his law tutor, Mrs. Lowe had told her husband more than once that he was much too handsome to do any good. Mr. Lowe, however, had replied that young Finn had never shown himself to be conscious of his own personal advantages. He'll learn it soon enough, said Mrs. Lowe. Some women will tell him, and then he'll be spoiled. I do not think that Phineas depended much as yet on his own good looks, but he felt that Mr. Kennedy ought to be despised by one such as Lady Laura Standish because his looks were not good. As she might, and she must despise him. It could not be that a woman so full of life should be willing to put up with a man who absolutely seemed to have no life within him. And yet why was he there? And why was he allowed to hang about just over her shoulders? Phineas Finn began to feel himself to be an injured man. That's takes place earlier in the story when Lady Laura has not yet declared, in a great scene, fantastic Trollope scene, where she tells Phineas Finn, I must tell you I am engaged to marry Paul Kennedy. And Phineas Finn immediately responds, well, I am too late. It's a wonderful, wonderful moment. And like so many great Trollope moments, it takes place in the wilderness. It takes place outside in a dramatic physical location. But we'll get to more of that as this book goes on. So that wraps it up for now. The dramatic high point of the chapters that we read this time along is that Lord Chiltern has an accident while out fox hunting. There is, of course, a fox hunting scene in these first 26 chapters. A fairly good fox hunting scene, not the soaring poetry of such a thing that Trollope can do, but that's coming. That's definitely coming. But you can't have a Trollope novel without a fox hunting scene. By this point, Trollope had written many, many novels. He was a household name. Readers knew what to expect of him, and they knew to expect such a scene, and he loved doing it. So, but Lord Chiltern has had a bad fall while riding. He's broken his collarbone and some ribs, and he's laid up. That is the dramatic point of these chapters so far in terms of action. And in terms of what we could call suspense, the high point is Phineas Finn getting up on his hind legs and talking, giving his maiden speech in Parliament. So, in other words, a fairly tepid beginning. You would have to be interested in whether or not this young hairdo from the provinces makes good in the political system of 100 years ago. Were you? I would like to hope that Trollope could make you interested in anything. If he tries, he's certainly trying very hard in this book. So as we wrap up our read-along for today, I'm wondering, did it work? This has to, for most of you, this system has to be completely alien. Were you pulled in? Was Lady Laura and Violet Effingham and Lord Chiltern, were they enough? Or did you perhaps like Phineas Finn? Did you perhaps like him as all the other characters do? The book so far that we've seen lacks, I think, any central compelling character. I believe it gets that later on. We'll be talking about Madame Max later on. It also lacks a villain, which is, I think, a fault. Trollope, I don't think, ever realized how good he is at villains. So he doesn't always put one in a book, and that's always a shame. I don't think at this point in our reading anyway you can count Paul Kennedy as a villain. But maybe you did. So again, as with our read-alongs from 2018, a large part of my winding up is going to be asking you for your responses. Those of you who are reading along, I'm dying to know, especially if you're reading Phineas Finn for the first time, what you're making of all of this. And that's gonna do it for today. So we will push on. We're 1 weekend down here, so we're doing a little bit more reading than usual. We're only doing 3 weekends, I think, for this. So we are going to read now from the chapter called Phineas Discussed, which is immediately follows the first speech. We're going to read from there all the way to chapter 49, The Duelists Meet. And that will leave us a good chunk of chapters for the final run, but the last third of Phineas Finn, I don't think you'll consider it work to read. I really don't. I think you'd be hard-pressed to stop reading it once you started. So it's just this middle one. So we'll go all the way to chapter 49, which is The Duelists Meet. And then we'll see. And, I might be wrong. You tell me. Are you finding this easy to read? Are you involved in the story? So we'll wrap this up for now. This is part 1 of Phineas Finn, the second Palliser novel, in which the Pallisers barely appear at all, but nevertheless. So we'll wrap this up for now, and we'll meet again next Sunday to keep talking about part 2, the next batch of chapters that we read. So fill me in, and I will see you soon. Thank you, Book 2.